Okay, let's dive into something really fascinating today. We've got these sources here, and they all seem to converge on this powerful idea, the psychological benefits of creation.
Yeah, the deep benefits.
And this deep dive, it isn't just about, feeling inspired. We want to unpack the evidence, the science behind it, what actually happens in our brains, our behavior, even our emotions when we make things.
Right. The mission here is to really understand why creating isn't just a hobby, why it's maybe something more fundamental.
Something that changes your brain, your habits, how you see yourself even.
And the sources show this isn't just for artists, right? It's
Okay.
writing, coding, gardening.
Exactly. Jewelry making, cooking, pretty much anything where you're generating something new.
It applies super broadly.
Right.
The core idea is that shift from consuming to generating. Seems simple, but the sources suggest it's incredibly potent.
It's digging into that why, like you said. Why do we have this drive? And it's backed by evidence, not just feelings.
It moves past anecdote into the mechanics.
So where do the sources kick this off? It goes way back, doesn't it? This isn't new.
Oh, not at all. The foundation is that being a maker is, well, it's deeply human. We're not just built to passively receive. Our brains, especially the prefrontal cortex, the bit doing the imagining, planning, complex thinking.
Right.
Many researchers believe it actually evolved, partly because of ancient creative stuff.
Like what, specifically?
Think about early tool making, the first stories people told, figuring out shelter, language itself. These were all deeply creative acts, problem solving.
Wow. So making things literally helped build our modern brains.
That's the argument. We're kind of hardwired for it.
But then the sources contrast that sharply with life today, which is often so much about, consuming.
Exactly. And that's where this idea of psychological undernourishment comes in. We spend so much time scrolling, watching, clicking.
Just taking stuff in.
Right. Constant input. It keeps us passive, maybe reactive. And that deep creation wiring, it doesn't get used.
And that feels off, like something's missing.
It can, yeah.
Yeah.
Like a fundamental part of us is dormant. So that shift the sources talk about from passive absorption to active generation, that seems to be the key mechanism.
And it's not just a vague feeling. The material gets into the actual biochemistry.
Absolutely. When you're engaged in creating something that triggers neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, the feel-good ones, and even oxytocin. That one's interesting, especially when you share what you've made. It builds connection.
So there's a biological reward built in.
Definitely. And the sources link this directly to things like building mental flexibility, better adaptive thinking, and getting a sense of control.
That sense of control feels huge, especially now.
In a world that often feels chaotic,
Yeah.
you're actively shaping a little piece of it.
Okay, let's unpack this next bit because it really struck me. The link between creation and flow state and how that connects to mindfulness.
Flow. Csikszentmihalyi's concept.
Right.
Being totally immersed, losing track of time, distractions just vanishing. The sources frame creation as one of the most reliable ways to get into that state.
And flow itself is really good for us.
Immensely. It significantly reduces anxiety. It gives you this deep sense of purpose and absorption while you're in it.
How does creation trigger it so well?
Well, unlike just watching something, creating usually demands the right kind of challenge. Enough to engage your focus, but not so much that it's overwhelming.
It hits that sweet spot.
Exactly. And the act of repeatedly doing that, seeking flow through creating, it's actually like training your brain.
Training it how? What's being built?
Focus regulation, essentially. Resisting distraction. Staying mentally present. One source calls it a psychological training ground.
Which sounds a lot like mindfulness.
There's a strong parallel. Think about it. When you're coding or sketching or working with clay, you're often in this state of quiet, internal observation, making small, deliberate choices. You're very aware of the process.
Like non-judgmental awareness, but you're doing something.
Kind of, yeah. And there's a physical side too, right? Especially with hands-on creation.
Definitely. The sources mention that.
Working with your hands, knitting, woodworking, painting, gardening, it brings back this sense of embodiment. It grounds you.
Pulls you out of your head and screens.
Yes.
Yeah.
Back into your senses. Touch, sight, maybe smell. It's an antidote to all the mental chatter.
Okay, moving on. The sources also explore how creation impacts our sense of self, our identity, even social stuff.
Right. This goes back to humans being storytelling creatures.
Right.
We build our identity largely based on what we do, our actions, our experiences.
Not just what happens to us.
Exactly.
Right.
But the challenge today, especially with social media, it's easy to sort of outsource identity. Define ourselves by what we watch, like, follow.
I see that, and creation pushes back against that.
It puts you back in the author seat of your own story. When you make something, a blog, furniture, even just keeping a journal, it's yours.
Something tangible you put into the world.
You're actively shaping your narrative, not just reacting to everyone else's.
And how does that play out socially? Does it change how you interact?
It gives you something authentic to share. Instead of just commenting on the latest trend or news, you have experiences rooted in your own efforts.
Something real to talk about.
Yeah, and that builds a different kind of confidence, the sources suggest. Not based on impressing people, but on sharing something you actually made. It makes you interesting through action.
And this active authorship, it has cognitive benefits too, beyond just identity.
For sure. It boosts metacognition, thinking about your own thinking. You reflect more. It strengthens memory because you're transforming ideas or experiences into a concrete form. And it builds a sense of continuity. Your life feels more like a coherent story you're writing.
Less like random events happening.
It's exactly a through line.
Okay, let's shift slightly, the emotional side. Creation as a tool for processing feelings, catharsis.
Yeah, there's a lot on this. Strong links to behavioral science, art therapy studies, showing real benefits for trauma, grief, stress.
How does it work? What's the mechanism?
It's fundamentally about externalizing the internal, giving form, shape to feelings that might feel overwhelming or stuck inside.
Like letting them out or organizing them?
Sort of. One source called it emotional digestion, which I liked. Journaling helps clarify confusing feelings with words. Painting or music might express things words can't capture. Songwriting can reframe pain.
You take the raw stuff inside,
Process it through the act of making.
and turn it into something you can see or hear outside yourself.
Exactly. Makes it less overwhelming, more manageable, perhaps.
Interestingly, the sources also said this builds empathy. How?
It's through the process. When you struggle with your own creative journey, the frustration, the vulnerability of finishing, the risk of sharing,
Yeah, that's all real.
you develop patience.
Yeah.
And you start to understand others' struggles better, whether creative or not. You see the messy reality of growth.
Facing that frustration, that also builds tolerance for uncertainty, right? Which is a huge life skill.
Absolutely huge. Every creative act is a step into the unknown. Will this work?
Yeah.
Will I fail?
What will people think?
All of that. But making things anyway teaches you to be okay in that gray zone. Failure becomes, well, it's just data. Information for the next try.
It's not you. It's not your identity.
Exactly. It's data, not destiny.
This feels like a good transition to how creating helps break that consumption loop the sources mentioned.
That's a direct interruption, yeah. We're so immersed in this consumption-first world, it trains certain habits.
Right.
The hunt for quick dopamine hits notifications, likes, shortened attention spans from constantly shifting content, even algorithmic thinking where platforms feed us what they think we want, reducing our own agency.
And creating is the opposite of that.
It flips the script. It forces active engagement, not passive receiving.
How does that change things day to day?
You start seeing time differently. Not just something to fill, but something to use. Your conversations might shift, contributing your own stuff, not just reacting.
Yeah.
Your imagination gets a workout because you're testing your ideas.
Pushing your own boundaries.
Right, not just consuming someone else's finished product.
And this builds on itself, a positive cycle.
Totally. A growth feedback loop. Every little thing you make, even if it feels small or imperfect.
Yeah.
It's evidence, proof you can do it.
And that builds confidence, real confidence.
Yeah, confidence from action. And it slowly rebuilds your ability to focus deeply on something that matters to you.
But, okay, let's be real. Creation also brings out the inner critic. Big time.
Oh, inevitably. Perfectionism, self-doubt, comparing yourself to others. Creation puts you right up against all of that. You see your limits.
So what do the sources say? Just push through.
They emphasize that facing the critic is the work. It's not a sign to stop. Learning to acknowledge the doubt, but act anyway. Learning to revise instead of just quitting.
That is emotional regulation.
Exactly. It's building resilience in real time.
No, it's important. The sources distinguish between different types of creation, right?
Yeah.
Not all making is inherently healthy.
That's a crucial point. Motivation matters. They talk about expressive creation versus extractive creation.
Okay, what's the difference?
Expressive creation is about feeding your inner world, exploring, learning, connecting with yourself. Extractive is when it's solely for external validation, casing likes, metrics, profit above all else, performing a certain image.
And that second one can be draining.
It can actually reproduce the same burnout and emptiness as passive consumption, just in a different guise. It's still focused outward on what others think. Healthy creation tends to nourish you first.
Got it. Beyond these major themes, the sources also touched on some subtler benefits, things we might overlook.
Yeah, the quiet skills sharpen along the way, like delayed gratification.
Right. Building something takes time.
Writing a book, learning an instrument, it stretches your patience, teaches you about sustained effort.
What else?
Self-distancing was interesting, like writing about your own experience in the third person. Apparently, that helps build insight and regulate emotions.
Detaching slightly to gain perspective.
Kind of. And then back to connection. Sharing your work authentically creates real belonging.
Based on shared interest or experience.
Yeah. And finally, that somatic integration, again, physical making grounds the mind and body. Gets you present.
Pulling all this together, what really stands out overwhelmingly is the message about just starting, the barrier to entry.
It's incredibly low. Yeah. That's the key takeaway from all this material.
Yeah.
You don't need to be a master. You don't need permission. You don't even need a grand plan.
You just begin.
Just begin. Every small act, no matter how imperfect, creates momentum. It's an act of agency.
So the bottom line here, synthesizing all these sources, creation is way more than just making stuff.
It's fundamentally good for your brain, body, identity, relationships, mental health, your focus, resilience, connection, the whole package, really.
And you really, truly don't need to be an expert or know exactly what you're doing at first.
Nope. Just need to start.
So maybe the final thought for you listening is this. Every time you make something, a meal, a drawing, code, a journal entry, anything, you're not just producing an object. You're actively changing yourself. You're becoming a fuller, more integrated version of who you are. In a way, creation is, well, it's proof you're truly vibrantly alive.
Well said.
Yeah.
And there's so much more here. Like, how do you choose what to create? Find your medium. That feels like a whole other deep dive.
Definitely something to explore another time.